Hello, and welcome to our College Sports Communicators webinar, where we will focus on the best practices and strategies for members to utilize during the voting periods of the academic All-American process. My name is Tommy Chasnoff, and I am the Assistant Athletic Director at the University of Cumberland, and will be serving as the moderator for today's session. This webinar is presented as a collaboration between the Academic All-American Core Program Committee and the Professional Development and Education Committee. Thank you to those who have submitted questions during registration. If you're watching live, you can submit additional questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'm joined today by Kyler Ludlow of the University of Dayton and Meredith Mahoney from Illinois Wesleyan University, and we are excited to share best practices and advice with you today. We got a lot to cover, so I'll turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and share more about their journey in athletic communication. Kyler, we're going to start with you first.
Great. Thanks, Tommy. My name is Kyler Ludlow. I work at the University of Dayton. I'm in charge of men's basketball and women's soccer athletic communications efforts. This is my third year working at Dayton. I've also worked at the University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan, and started my career at Palm Beach Atlantic University.
Awesome. Meredith, how about for you?
Hi, my name is Meredith Mahoney. I'm in my fourth year at Illinois Wesleyan University. This is my second year as an assistant director of athletic communications. I spent the first 2 years as a grad assistant, and I work primarily with men's and women's volleyball, men's and women's lacrosse, and men's and women's swim and dive. And then I started my career as a student worker at Central College.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have such a great panelist here today. Let's start, and the first question I want to ask is, why is it important for people to vote in the Academic All-America program?
So for me, it's been something that has been a long-standing value that we can bring as communicators, whether it was prior as COSIDA and now as CSC. We're looking at ways that we add value to our athletic departments all the time. And this is one of the most important things that we can do in athletics communication. I know that we have many hats that we wear throughout the course of a school year, but being able to honor our students in kind of the ultimate award is very important, not only to the student athletes, but to the institutions as a whole that we serve, and quite frankly, like for our value that we bring to an athletic department. It doesn't need to be the biggest thing we do, but it's certainly an incredibly important thing we do.
What about for you?
Yeah, I think that being an academic and All-American is the pinnacle of us being a student athlete. You're excelling in the classroom and on your court and your sport. And I think that anything that we can do to help that in athletic communications, as college sport communicators, and voting is important for that. This is a really big piece of what CSC believes in. And so anything that we can do to help that is very important. So any vote matters, every vote matters. And so no matter what sport it is and what division it is, it all does help benefit our student athletes.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Now, if there's someone who's new to the process, what's something that they should be expecting as they head into voting for the Academic All-America for the first time? Meredith, why don't you start on this one?
Yeah, I think that when you're going through it as a first-time voter, it can look a little overwhelming. And I think if you just take the time to really think about what you're voting for and who got nominated in that field and who's good for it. I think if you set aside some time and really just let yourself dive into the voting process, you're going to set yourself up for a lot of success. Use the resources to your advantage. Look up at All Americans, look up all region awards, find different ways to help separate who's the best in that field.
Absolutely. Kyler, I'm going to ask you a different question. What's your current system? How do you organize the voting materials? Because when you log in, there are different ways that you can look at the materials, and how do you organize it? What have you found to be work best?
Well, I know that admittedly the easiest thing we can do is sort by GPA, right? But the thing for me is that When I log in, I do start at the GPA, but that is literally just as a sorting tool, and I take the time and go from the top of the list to the very bottom of the list because that 3.5 could be the best player in the country, and if I'm just picking the top 8 GPAs, then I miss that person, and that's not what this award is about. It is about finding that overall athletic student athlete that can take this award, and really it makes us look good when we have the best overall player. And so when I do, I sort, but it is taking an hour to 2 hours on an afternoon and going through each person and looking and then kind of working my list down from there. And there are some people that, while deserving candidates for the All District Award, that you can tell that they just don't separate themselves quite from the rest of the pack. And it's easy to kind of set them aside and know that that's not one of your choices. When it comes to splitting hairs is when it gets more fun because it really is measuring up the accolades on the court, on the field, on the water, wherever it happens to be, and including those GPAs and what they do. For me, it starts with the GPA, but it is certainly, if I'm selecting a bunch of 4.0s and just hitting submit, then I'm not doing my job correctly. That's just the beginning for me.
Oh, and Kyler, I think one other big point is when you go in and log into CSC, on the right column, you will see Excel sheets to download.
Yeah.
How important is it to download those so you can be able to sort it, like you mentioned, by different category?
Yeah, it's absolutely it's an essential part of the way I do my voting because it does, like you said, Tommy, it helps you with the sorting and figuring out those other categories that include the community service, that include the awards, that include the other parts of the student athlete as a whole that are really important. And the materials are provided by CSC. It's right there to download and go. And so that's incredibly important. Thanks for bringing that back up.
Yeah, and I'm going to mention one other thing. We'll get into it in a little bit. Is when you have sports that are position sports, and we'll show this later on, you can also sort it by position so that you can vote within, if you're voting for football or basketball or soccer, you can vote just on forward, so you can compare forward to forward and not a forward to a goalie because those positions are different and there are different categories of how many you can vote for. Talk to me, Meredith, about, we are in the middle of a crossover season. We have very busy going on. I know you guys have a lot of postseason success. How do you track the deadlines? How do you make sure that you vote and you make sure you don't miss a deadline?
Yeah, I think the CSC gives you the Academic All America calendar very far in advance. So getting that on your calendar, whether I use a Google Calendar, that's how I organize my life. I found it very important that it's on there. Deadlines. We also check in with each other, and so we make sure that things are nominated. We make sure that our first year SIDs are good to go. We help them with awards, help structuring it. But it's really just making sure that it's a collective effort because at the end of the day, if one of us misses a deadline, it goes on all of us. So it's just making sure it's on your calendar well in advance and not waiting till the last day to do it.
Absolutely. Kyler, I know you guys have multiple people in your department. How do you make sure that not only you are voting, but that the rest of your department's voting with you?
Yeah, I'm sure we're similar to a lot of places. We meet every Monday for our office, to kind of get everybody on the same page and how we're going to cover what throughout the week, especially during crossover season. And we have multiple of us that have that calendar. While I'm more of a physical, actual write in a calendar type of person, I know we also have someone on our staff that is like Meredith and is a Google Calendar person, and that works to our advantage because we have it in multiple places. If somebody accidentally put it on the wrong date, it's like, nope, this is what it is. So we bring that up and put it on the calendar for everyone's attention 2 weeks out usually, because that's kind of how the motion of our office is as we look forward. But it is very much reminding everybody in that meeting. There's a little bit of accountability then that's like that we then say like, hey, are your nominations done? And following back around, it's to be tedious. And like Meredith said, if we miss somebody because of a deadline, that's a poor reflection on our office, not just the singular person. And when we're kind of holding each other accountable in that meeting, it really takes us a long way.
Well, I also think you have to look at the emails that she sends out on a consistent basis. They've done a tremendous job of reminding us of deadlines that are coming up. So even if somehow it slips off your calendar, just checking your email, making sure you're reading through those emails are really going to be important with those deadlines. Moving on to sorting, comparing some nominees, and we're looking for the best practices. What filters or criteria do you use to narrow down nominees effectively? Tyler, why don't you start this one, and then we'll get Meredith involved in this as well.
Yeah, so and it certainly depends on your sport, but we've mentioned before, like sometimes it isn't easy to compare a center back on a soccer team to a forward because the counting stats just aren't going to be there, and that's where the sorting to me, if the SID has taken the time, or the athletics communication person has taken the time to write in the extracurriculars that this person has, those extra community service tidbits, like that goes a long way for me to make sure that that person's included. And so I think from the nominee side, I'm making sure to include that. But then when I'm voting, I'm looking for when it's, I mean, these are all amazing candidates for the most part. So when you're splitting hairs, those are the things that help determine exactly what we're going to be voting on, how we can vote going forward. So to me, it's sorting through in that Excel document and seeing what those additional comments are, that can kind of help when it is a razor thin margin of a difference. And especially when you're trying to compare somebody that may have scored 0 goals, but they were the center back and captain for a team that had 15 shutouts for the year. Like that does matter. It is very important. It's not easy to quantify that, because of the lack of counting stats. But when you see those additional little tidbits about the team and about how well the team has done through the year, and then some extracurriculars on top of that that include some amazing things. Student athletes do it all the time. They're in the community, involved in the community. Sometimes we don't even know. And when they include that in there, it can be a real difference maker.
Meredith, I'm going to follow up with a little bit of a different question on that. Is you have how do you factor this year's stats, someone who's had a breakout year this year versus someone who has had a great career, who's probably been an All-American previously, but maybe not have had the numbers this year, and you have another player who hasn't had an all-conference. This is their first year being an all-conference player. Talk to me about comparing those kinds of nominees.
Yeah, I think it's really hard when you're looking at maybe somebody that had 3 really great years and then their senior year wasn't as good. Wear and tear on your body is a thing, and so it's really hard to be excellent for 4 years. But I kind of keep a strong head on my shoulders about it in terms of that this is the academic All-Americans for this year, and so I think that it can play a part in it. Maybe if you're comparing similar stats, but and just knowing, oh, she was a 3-time, 4-time first team all conference, 2-time, 3-time player of the year. But at the end of the day, I think that we're voting for the best athletes in the field for this year. And I try to keep that really strongly on my mind, strongly at the top of my priority list, because I don't want to cheat somebody out of who had a really good year to give somebody that I know maybe didn't have as great of a year, but has had a good career.
Meredith, you also mentioned, look at the all-region, all-American. There are some categories, and I know for NAIA soccer compared to volleyball, for instance, soccer, the nomination period closes before all-Americans become released. Volleyball, the nomination period stays open through when all-Americans are released. So you have different things of information's different. So how does that change how you approach voting? Because they cannot put that information in there.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great point. I think it's really easy to when you're looking at academic All-Americans when you have the All-American list come up, and obviously that's not always the case. But I think that that's where first of all, when you're doing the nominations, making sure that you're checking that it's not determined yet, because that means that they're not a no. In my mind, that means that they haven't not been on that list yet, and there's a chance that they are. But I think that that's where when you're sorting through the Excel file, that your conference player of the year list is, that's when you're saying yes, and you're really making sure that you check that box and you put in there that, they were a 2-time defensive player of the year, and then, has previously been an All-American in these years. Because if they have similar stats to what they have in years past, and they are already an All-American, there's probably a good chance that they're going to be it again this year. But I think that it's really crucial that you're looking at the all conference and conference player of the years, especially. You can sort pretty quickly on conference player of the year. And those are usually going to be on your All American list.
Absolutely. Kyler, are there any red flags or standout qualities you look for while reviewing the nominees?
I don't want to say that there's necessarily red flags that will immediately disqualify people. When I'm looking at that sheet and I see that GPA is there, like that like I said, I sort that way. And if they've met the credential, like I'm counting on through the nomination process that you're not nominating just a nobody. And that's why last week's webinar and the importance of the nominee is really important too. And maybe it's a red flag on me that I'm assuming that, but to me, if they're in consideration for All-American candidacy, the red flags really come down to have all of the different parts been filled out. And going back to why it's important we take this seriously and do it to the best as we can. Because to me, when I'm sorting through, I'm reading through every category, and if some of them are left blank, and like Meredith said, they're not a national or All-American, or they've had those things in the past, but not this year. As long as it's not determined yet, great. But if to me, it is going case by case, and I try not to eliminate anybody until it is because of the merits that disqualify them, not necessarily because of anything else.
Yeah, I think that you hit on the big one, which is leaving section blank. I think that's one of the top ones. When you're getting down and splitting hairs, obviously you talked about GPA, but also how much did the major factor in when evaluating some student athletes? Because that is one of the criteria that has to be filled out.
Yeah, to me, it matters greatly. I know I was a communications major, and I know that my 3.4 in communications was not as impressive as my wife's 2.9 in biology. Her classes were much harder than mine. And I take that same kind of mentality and knowing that, I mean, for a lot of cases, a lot of our candidates are in majors that are incredibly impressive. And to be the caliber of athletes they are while being in these positions does, like, it's always amazing to see. And I know that, if it's a 3.96 in bio pre-med versus a 4.0 in communications, like my vote tends to go towards the 3.96 in pre-med because I know what communications is, and for better or for worse. And that there's other parts of that where the institution is, what the institution's background is, an Ivy League, like, that stands out. Those schools that are academically prestigious, we're at the Division 1 level, their names that everybody knows. And the smaller Division 2 and Division 3, there's places that those degrees carry huge weight. And that, yeah, the 3.85 in engineering at this school is a really, really, really tough thing to do. And that's where our institutional knowledge comes into play with NCSC, and part of knowing our colleagues across the country comes into play, because it does matter. And while it might not be the most, I don't want to call it fair to disregard a 4.0 in something because it's a quote unquote easy major. At the same time, that's at the end of the process. That's splitting hairs, because those kids that have put in work on the field or on the court and are pulling these majors in pre-law, pre-med, whatever it happens to be, like, they deserve that extra look, because it is so difficult to balance everything that they have to do. And having had experience in 2 majors of sport management and communications, I know I personally weigh those, and for other people, it can definitely be different. It's kind of individual perception for sure. But to me, it's also like, yeah, at the end of the day, that does kind of see the cream rise to the top with that sort of mentality behind it.
Meredith, one category that's a unique category that we have in CSC is the at-large division, and we've talked about it. We mentioned it on this call previously. Trying to compare sports like golf to wrestling to lacrosse to ice hockey, what kind of mentality, what kind of tips do you have for people who are trying to do that in the at-large category?
I think that that's when you're I know I just keep saying it here, but that's when your conference player of the year and your all American or your national recognition filters really come in handy, because those lists are already really long and they're really hard to dive into and to look at and separate. But I think that if you're putting your conference player of the years and your nationally recognized athletes into there, I think you're going to set yourself up for success. I think that that's where the time management comes into it, though. The at large, you just have to accept and know that it's going to take long. If you want to do it and do it well. You have to set away a little more time than you are for maybe football or volleyball, where you know the sport better. Because there are sports that not everybody has. I mean, a lot of the Ivy Leagues have fencing, and a lot of those fencing athletes are also on the Olympic teams. So how do you balance that versus how do you balance the water polo kids that are also Olympians? And I think that that's where we go back on the nomination, that the extra stuff matters that you're putting in, because there's not a box to check if it says Olympians. But if you say, hey, they just competed out in the Summer Olympics, that's a really big, and they're academically eligible for this, that's a really, really big tool. And that's something that I look at. But I think that it's really just, that's when you really have to separate who's the best in their field and who's the ones that, that you're looking at. And, there's some schools, and especially in golf, where they might win a conference tournament shooting above par. And there's conferences that, we're fortunate to have a really good golf team. Like we have 4 or 5 guys that are shooting under par. And so when you're looking at that, those are separations you have to look at, that maybe not always, that's when maybe not always the conference player of the year comes through on that. But just kind of taking the time to look through information in that realm and looking what's in the extra comments boxes.
Tyler, you mentioned you put a lot of time into the voting process. How do you block off that time, and how do you make sure you protect that time so you actually do have, the hour, 2 hours that you designated, set aside, that something doesn't interfere?
Sure. I mean, we actually have a pretty unique office set up we have like tall cubicles, so it's open air where we can yell at each other over top and as our communication method between one another. And whether you close your door or not, people can still talk with you. But what I tend to try to do is make sure I communicate like, hey, everybody, we need to vote for this week. The nominations are up, voting started, we're all voting. I'm going to use this time to do my voting, and kind of make it clear like I'm available, but not really. If it's something important, absolutely come and talk to me. But I also try to vote early when the window opens. That way, if a distraction does come along that I can't avoid stopping my process, I can come back to it at a later point. I also personally am an early bird and get to the office before everyone else. So I tend to do it when I'm alone, in the hour and a half before everyone else gets in. But if it's in the afternoon and it's just because that's, how time goes sometimes, I block it off and use it as that reminder of like, hey, everyone, we need to get our voting in. And that's a lot of times I'll get my voting done early and then talk to my coworkers about like, okay, so here's the kind of list, and like our 4 players that I put through for All American nominees, like I think these 2 are really actually really, really good, and try to sell my own players with or student athletes. And then also mentioning like, if you need help with it, if you want to hear what I did, I'm more than happy to talk about it, and kind of communicating in that sense of you're kind of doubling down on, hey, reminder, do your voting. without being, hammering it over the head and just saying like, yeah, I think we have some really great candidates. And it works out for me to do it that way. And because of my personal clock that I'm in before everyone else, I can usually get everything accomplished without having to really block stuff off. Now with traveling and everything else that goes in during crossover seasons, that can make it more complicated. That's obviously when I utilize like, hey, my door's shut, but this is what I'm working on. So if you need me, I am sort of available. It's just clear communication, which is what we're supposed to be really good at, right? So
Yeah, and Kyler, I'll follow up. I do a similar strategy here. I have fortunate to have a bigger staff. I'll get my vote in early and I'll tell them, I remind them throughout the week, get the voting in. And also my door's open, so feel free to come in and let's talk if you have questions, if you need help, especially when we have new GAs or new staff members who have never voted before. Help them walk through the process and understand why is it important. So that's stuff we use here as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. Meredith, you voted now for a couple of years. Obviously, we know Illinois Wesleyan has had a great success. What's one small change that has made a big difference in the process of voting workflow?
I think that it's kind of like what Kyler said, where we just kind of all set time aside to do it. I think the beauty of a CSC membership is that you can have as many members on there that work in the field. And so making sure that everybody that is on your membership is voting. And so we tell our student workers when they come in, if they're coming in for office hours and there's a deadline coming up, we say, hey, you're gonna vote for this sport today because you're on our membership, and here's kind of the tools that we use, and here's the All-American list, and here's whatever award list you need. But it's making sure that one, we're getting everything out of our membership that it's designed for, but also that then our student workers are getting practice voting for it and understanding the importance behind it. And then the pride that they get to see when their classmates get academic All-American, and just knowing, hey, maybe I voted for them, or hey, one of my friends at a different school got it and I voted for them. I'm really excited about that. But I think it's taking pride in what you vote for, and who you vote for. And when, I always get excited when however many I see on the list, they get it. It's like, oh, I got 18 of the 20 spots, like correct in my mind of like, oh, those are the 18 kids I voted for. So it's kind of cool to see that. But I think that it's just making sure that one, you set the time aside, and two, that you're teaching the next generation on how you're voting and how you're doing it. Because I know that when I started, it's a little overwhelming at first, and that's kind of why we're putting on a webinar like this. It is overwhelming, but if you figure out your methods and you figure out your groove for it, it gets pretty easy, and it gets really fun sometimes. You're going through it and you're getting to help these kids win this huge award.
Yeah, and we're going to go through. I know Meredith is going to show some of them here in a few minutes, some different sheets and some different Excels. But before we get to that, what are some common mistakes that you've seen or made during the voting period? Kyler, you want to start that one?
oh, just flat out having the dates not even wrong, but just not it like before I was in the early parts of my career, having those just on the side and not really paying attention to it, and then having to rush through it. And that's when just sort by GPA and click, 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 done, because I want to get the votes in. And that was mismanagement of time on my end. And that was a one-man shop. That was when I was young and hadn't really done it a whole lot before. And so I think to me, that's the time management aspect of what we do when we vote is part of that reality, and being able to avoid rushing. That's when you kind of when I leave myself too little time to actually go through the voting process of sorting by the major and sorting by their I keep saying extracurriculars, but their volunteer hours or whatever it happens to be. Like those are the things that when I put it off to the last minute, rush, let it get on top of me, I can just blow right by my process and just click and go. And that's the number one thing I try to avoid now. And that's the thing I've been able to avoid for a while at this point. But that time management is the huge part of that.
Meredith, what about for you?
I think that at first when I was going through it, I think we kind of talked about it on our pre when we were all talking about this pre-panel, but when you're debating if you can or cannot vote for your student athletes, I think that at first it felt really weird voting for my student athletes, and I didn't know if I was like allowed to or if that was like kind of frowned upon. But after asking some people, they're like, no, like if you think that they're worth a vote, you can 100% vote for your own student athletes. There's a reason that they're popping up on your ballot. And I also think that, you don't have to feel guilty if you don't vote for them. I think that there's part of me that felt guilty if we put these athletes through and that I didn't vote for them. But at the end of the day, that our job is to select the however many best that are in this field. And so if you think that you think that your student athlete's worthy of that nomination and worthy of your vote, 100% vote for them. And if you also then look at it and you're like, I thought maybe they had a great chance at this first, but man, there's some stud athletes in this group. Do not feel bad about not voting for them, because you're at the end of the day, you're not choosing to leave them off. You just didn't know that there's going to be all these athletes in the field, and that that's who you want to spend your vote on. And I think that don't feel guilty whether or not you do it.
Yeah, and just a reminder, everyone you nominate is a CSCL district winner, and that is an accomplishment in itself. And so, it's different levels. We talk about it, winning all conference versus winning an All American is kind of similar with this award. And the academic All American is such a prestigious award. We want to make sure we're recognizing the best in each of the fields. So I think that's a great point. How can you guys avoid bias or over reliance on name recognition and focus on the facts of what's right in front of you on the Excel sheet? Kyler, you have a thought?
Well, I think what Meredith pointed out a little bit earlier about how this is an award for this year, helps me with that, because I I don't want to say I completely disregard the person's name and the school they're from, but there comes a point that disregarding the name and looking at the stats and how they measure up is what matters most to me, versus, oh, this person was a 3-time academic all district member and is great, but this isn't a lifetime achievement award. This is for this year. And so for me, that's where that kind of mentality really focuses in on. It is the numbers that matter, and avoiding that, reputation, and getting away from, oh, this person has been an All-American 2 times before. Click, absolutely, third time. Now, usually there's a reason they're a two-timer or been on it before, and typically the stats back it up. So I think it is a more of a rare occasion. But when it's, especially working in the Division I realm, there are student athletes that people know by name in households across the country, and putting them through is great. But if it's a 3-5 in communications, like, that goes against my own mentality of how I'm voting, if I'm voting for them just because I know who they are, versus that 4.0 in pre-law or whatever it happens to be. So I think to me, it is kind of going back to the roots of the statistical part of the nomination process, and really making sure that is a worthy candidate, and almost ignoring the way that those names can kind of influence us.
Okay, so one more question. What's one piece of advice you guys wish you would have known before your first time voting?
Don't wait till the last hour to do it, because it will take longer and it will stress you out. I remember doing that for my first time with soccer, and I was like, oh, this doesn't seem too bad. And then I was like scrambling at the end because I was dealing with my first ever crossover season and everything. But just don't wait till the last day. Don't wait till the last hours, whatever. Just, try to set aside time in advance, kind of like what Kyler said earlier. Set a time aside so that if things come up, you still have a buffer zone on it, but really try to stick to it. And just know that if you're going to wait till the last minute to do it, you're not going to probably get your best votes in, and you're not going to really take the time to look through it. You're going to rush.
Tyler, what about for you?
Well, I think leaning on my other staff members that are voting on this as isn't a sign of weakness, because like they're the ones that are also voting, and you help each other out when you do it. because sometimes it can be like, okay, I need to vote on this and just move on to voting. You help your fellow staff members out when you're talking about it and making sure it's getting done, because you miss deadlines. I remember one of the early days in this field, like I thought I missed a deadline for nominations because I had written it down in my calendar wrong, but I didn't bring it up to anybody else, so no one could say like, "Hey, actually, that nomination's due next week." And so we collectively can make each other better, as communications professionals when we're sharing in what we're doing. And I think to me that's the biggest thing to carry forward and now avoid trying to be on the island and do it all myself. It's not really a weakness to need help, and especially when it comes to remembering things.
Well, and I'm going to build off of that. One other piece of that is don't be afraid to ask for help if it's a sport you're not as familiar with. Because you guys, we're all in athletic departments. Yes, we have very well-rounded knowledge, but there are some sports that I'm not as familiar with. So I'm going to reach out to other people and get their take and ask their advice because they understand, you know, center back in defense, for example, when you don't have those stats. Okay, who's my soccer expert? I don't cover soccer. I'm going to go to the person who does cover soccer. Talk to me about this. Why do you think this is impressive compared to that? So using those experts. At this time, Meredith, I know you've had a couple. We can take a look at some examples of previous nominations and talk through some of that. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds good. We can start with the football ballot because that'll come up a little quicker than the at-large one. But when you're looking, when you're looking at this Excel sheet, this is what you're gonna download. It'll say on that the side of the nomination portal or of the voting portal. And this is like when I say it looks a little overwhelming at first, but if you take the time to go through it, I mean, it gets pretty easy. Football is a nice one because it's by sport it's by position that you're voting. So that helps you a bit, but that's where this primary position comes handy that you can organize it. You can hit sort, and you can hit, if you uncheck select all, it gets rid of everybody. If you just want to look at defensive backs, you can just click them. If you just need to look at kickers, you can click them. And then quarterbacks as well. So when you're doing all that, it's pretty easy. But you can sort by academic year. So if you go up to here, if you wanted to select that, you could also do the ascending and descending. Gets a little hard with it, but because it's going to kind of come alphabetically. It's the weird part of Excel in that sense. But you have that. You can sort by academic major. You can sort by GPA is usually a big one that people want to sort by. So you can go descending, and you have all the 4.0s at the top. But I think, and especially in positional ones, if you're looking at quarterbacks, for instance, you can, when you select a quarterback down here, you have just the ones you're looking at, and then you scroll over. And if you're going, because obviously with quarterbacks, you're looking at probably passing touchdowns and passing yards. So you can hit ascending, descending, anything in there. And that helps you maybe guide on who would be the top 3 or 4 in that field.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, when I look at that, that's exactly what I do. I'll actually even go and take it a step further and hide categories that are not relevant to position. So like for quarterback, any of these reception stuff, I'll take all those categories and hide them so I can look at the numbers compared to the writings at the far right. And then it makes it easier to compare one to the other. So that's another option of how you can do that. Kyler, any feedback from you when you look at like a football Excel sheet like this?
No, I think Tommy, what you just said with the hiding the categories is something I like to do as I'm voting, because exactly what you said, it can kind of get us to those other categories down at the far end of the voting sheet, because as much as Excel's great, I use it all the time, it can still be like, wait a minute, what was that again? And you're just scrolling back and forth and feeling like you need to ultra wide screen to actually cover everything you want. The way hiding those is a perfect tidbit that I use all the time when I vote for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Meredith, did we want to show the at-large one? I know it could take an extra second.
Yeah, I can share that at-large one as well. So at-large is the one I talked to earlier, that it's usually going to be the largest pool, just based on the sports. And this is where it gets overwhelming. You're looking at it. Um, But once again, you can sort by sport. If you wanted to just look at maybe the All-American list for beach volleyball that's up here, you can start with them. But this is the one where when you're going through it, this is where you're gonna need to set time away, because it's gonna take a bit if you really want to do it to the standard that you would want to. I take a lot of time when I do the at-larges, because I want to make sure that I'm looking at all the sports and I'm not forgetting one. I don't want to vote for too many lacrosse players and not any gymnasts, because there's maybe a gymnast in there that's won a national championship versus maybe a second team All American on lacrosse. But that's where these really come in handy. Of They were recognized as conference player of the year. You can hit select all, and you can maybe hit not determined yet and yes on there, and that gets rid of all the no's on there. You can then do the ones with the national honors, and that's where you're going through it of the yes and the no's and the not determines, and you're making sure that you're looking at that, selecting it and maybe just selecting yes. Because at this point, you know that if it's not determined yet, that, there's a chance that they probably didn't get it, or in some realm of that, because at large is so much later. And that's when all these comments in here are going to take a while. But if you really want to look at it, that's where you can find if they were first team All American. Maybe they were the regional player of the year that you can't really select that for if you're looking at things. Um, you know, here's I can see this gymnastics one, like a 9.9 on a vault at a regional. That's a pretty high vault, and you just keep looking at things like that. If you're comparing that to maybe a defenseman in lacrosse that has 85 ground balls this season. It's like, how do you manage that? But that's where the time taken to do the nominations really helps.
Oh, and I'm going to speak to this with a different sport, and that's the sport of cheer and dance, where you don't even have any individual stats that go with it. It's based on your team performance. Trying to compare that, I think you just need to make sure you're doing your due diligence when you're nominating, and also doing your due diligence when you're voting and reading all of those different criteria. Um, Okay, so I'm going to go back to you guys with the final question that I have right now. Whether members are new to the process or veteran, what's the best piece of advice you have to offer?
Joe, I think the extra effort matters. We just saw in that list that Meredith showed there were multiple that didn't have any of the community service award things filled out. Like when we're splitting hairs, especially in at large, where there's so many different quantifiable stats that don't translate to one another, like going the distance as nominators helps us get to the point that we are putting the best foot forward for the student athlete, and thus as the voters, when we are looking at it, putting that into practice, not just saying here like, yeah, that extra effort matters for you. It matters for me to go through that effort, downloading the Excel file and reading through all of those things. And when you're leaving things blank, it's like, okay, well, maybe they're not as strong of a candidate as this person. And so that extra effort does matter from a voting standpoint. Absolutely.
What about for you?
Yeah, I would say, almost going on off the community service, when you're nominating them for academic all district or academic all American, they're automatically getting academic all district. And if you're afraid to reach out to your student athletes and don't want to get their hopes high on the academic award, you could go with the, hey, I'm looking to get some community service for this award I'm putting you up for. What have you done that maybe that I don't know of? Can you send me a list? is there anything that you would want to, like, are you the president of the business fraternity around here, or, of the student senate? They're automatically going to get the academic all district. So that is something that, at the end of the day, you can say, oh, you got this award. I'm really proud of you. I'm really hyped for you. But, we all know that you're really trying to get the community service so that they get the academic all American. But at the end of the day, you have a backup plan of, if they just get academic all district, it didn't go for nothing.
So after we get through the initial voting, we have to go back through and select the top 3 nominees for the Academic All-America of the Year. What process do you guys use to select those 3 finalists?
If for me, it is similar to my process of getting my All Americans in the first place. It is doing a compare and contrast, and I'm not in at large, so the difficulty of having to compare and contrast across those different sports. Maybe Meredith can speak more to it than I can. But for me, we've been around sports as the communicators. We know the places that these kids are coming from, that they're nominated for. And so when I think that's why I say it's one of the most important things we do as voters. When we put our kids up like that, we would see them being the academic All-America, one of those top 3 finalists, like putting the best foot forward. And we can then, on the flip side, as voters, look through and kind of determine, like, yes, student athlete A over student athlete B, and the justification can come from those statistical factors and the process that we go through, similar to putting the All-America list together from the get-go. I mean, to me, I don't want to say it's a easy thing. It's a simple thing when that process is in place to kind of put the separators there of, like, okay, this is clearly the best one. Like, they've got an impressive grade. They've got impressive off the field things that they are involved with, and they're a great athlete on the field or court. That it's putting it through that process again, maybe with a magnifying glass and the fine tooth to make sure we go through every detail a little bit even closer. But for me, it's reverting back to that process we've used to get to that point in the first place.
Meredith, any thoughts? How do you decide your top 3?
Yeah, I think that when I'm really looking at the top 3, that's kind of the only time I'm really looking at GPA and majors. And because a lot of times the top 3, if they're top 3, there are 3 kids that have 4.0s and about similar stats. If this kid at MIT, which is a powerhouse for academic All-Americans, for legit reasons, they have a 4.0 in biomechanical engineering and are also a stud volleyball player, they probably have my vote. And that they're excelling in every single field, and they're a game changer on their team, and are probably going to be a game changer in the workforce. I think that that's when that really comes into play. I know that we've been fortunate to get a few academic All-Americans of the Year since I got here. And for instance, our softball player just got it for D3, and she was a Gold Glove winning shortstop, first team All-American, and was leading our team which is in the town that she grew up in. And she's also doing this while running her own businesses and doing her own softball clinics and really just growing the game. And I think that that's when, Katie Gonzalez did a really good job in the additional comments selling that part of her. But, she's doing everything that she can to grow the game of softball, both as a whole and in the town that she grew up in and that she played in.
I think the other thing that you guys hit on too is when you're going through and you're doing your initial voting, keep in mind that you have to vote for a top 3. So I'm going to not only mark them for the All-American team, I'm going to make a separate list. So I take this list of 15, 20 names, and I've already cut it down to 3, because there is a distinction between my number 1 wide receiver and my number 3 wide receiver, who I put on an All-American list. So I think that's another way of just making sure you're doing it as you're moving along, and that way you're not forgetting names.
Yeah, take notes. I think that, I like to take a lot of notes when I do things. I know for football, like when I'm looking at the offensive line stats, and it's kind of like a defense in soccer where they might not have stats, but there's a reason that they're in there and there's a reason that they're good. And if you look on it and in the comments, it says, did not give up a sack this year. probably means they were really good on the offensive line and you know that they're worthy of that. And then you look and like, oh, they have a 3.96 as biochem and you know at a really good school or you know won a national championship. I think that that weighs heavy in the decisions that they should be at the top of your list. But yeah, looking at the different, you know, you're looking for the top person in those spots and in those positions, and then you're kind of narrowing your field down from there.
Well, I want to extend a big thank you to Kyler and Meredith for sharing their advice with college sports communicators to ensure that we are the best prepared to vote on future academic All-Americas. Thanks to everyone who joined us and submitted questions. Please take a moment to complete our brief post-webinar survey to help us improve our future programming. We encourage you all to visit collegesportscommunicators.com for updates on future webinars and membership news. Thanks again for being with us today.